His name is Keith Ellison, and he is one of the most recognized faces in the US Congress. Ellison was born in Detroit, Michigan. He was raised as a Roman Catholic, but later converted to Islam.
Trying to get folks to vote next Tuesday. Okay.
He became a lawyer and was married to high school teacher by the name Kim Ellison. World attention was drawn to Keith Ellison when he became the face of a nationwide controversy in 2006. While swearing in as the first Muslim member of the US Congress, Ellison insisted on swearing his oath of office on the Quran. Ellison went on to take his oath on a copy of Quran that had originally belonged to Thomas Jefferson.
Hey, me!
Ellison has been an opponent of the Iraq War. He joined fellow Minnesota freshman Democrat Tim Walz in opposing President Bush's plan to increase troop levels in Iraq. In 2007, he visited Iraq and also stopped in Germany to meet the wounded US soldiers. At a hearing in Congress on radicalization of Muslim communities by Republican Congressman Peter King, Ellison strongly defended the Muslim community and his faith.
That you got brothers and sisters in Congress.
Today, he continues to work closely with many interfaith groups and remains a voice of civil rights in the US Congress.
Each week here at Cafe DC, I go one-on-one. Politicians, literary giants, activists, power brokers, and many more from different walks of life. And focusing on what matters is my cup of, shall we say, coffee. Matters that make a difference in the society. Watch me, Faiz Rahman, on Cafe DC, every week only on PTV World. You're watching Cafe DC and I'm Faiz Rahman. Today our guest is one of a very well-known members of Congress, Congressman Keith Ellison, who has written a book and today is with us to talk about his wonderful account of his childhood and membership in the Congress. Thank you very much and welcome back to Cafe DC.
Thank you very much, Fez. It's really an honor to be back with
Absolutely.
you.
Congressman, we heard that members of Congress are a busy lot. How did you find time to write such a wonderful book?
Insomnia.
You don't get enough sleep.
No, well, you know what? I actually, to be serious, I just sort of scheduled from about 5 a.m. to about 6 and just wrote for about a few months. I also had someone who helped me edit and gave me constant feedback. So we just worked, and they'd read what I wrote, and then tell me expand on this, cut this, and we just sort of worked together. And it took about 6 months, but we got it done.
Does it mean that you don't watch House of Cards?
No,
Congress?
I've never seen it. I've
Really?
never seen a single episode. No, but I hear that it is quite an exaggeration.
Well, you don't come close to what we see.
Okay.
As, a member of Congress in that Netflix program. But let me start about the race relations. I mean, that features very prominently in this book, and you said we have done well. We have come a long way when it comes to race relations in this country, but still there's a lot of room for more work.
Yes, it's true.
If you were to write this I Have a Dream speech again, which was given by Dr. Martin Luther King, what would you add and delete looking at today's conditions in this country?
Well, I wouldn't change a thing, but I think it's important to remind everybody that what Dr. King was talking about was an aspiration. Martin Luther King was killed on April 4th, 1968. And when he died, he not only was marching for civil rights, but also economic rights. The denial of access to, everything from housing to jobs to everything for African Americans in the 1960s also meant that people were relegated to poverty. We've made progress on the social changes and the legal changes, but still, there's vast disparities in economic opportunities, educational attainment, and things like that. And we've got to really address that because people are living in dire circumstances. When the foreclosure crisis hit the United States in 2008 and 2009, African American household wealth was wiped out, and far more so than the white community, because their economic life is so much more fragile. But not only that, the wages have been stagnant for years, and things like sending your children to college is, a fleeting dream. and difficult. And yet people aspire. People believe that they can do it. People believe America should produce a level playing field where everybody can succeed and get ahead, and that hard work should pay off. And yet Martin Luther King couldn't possibly imagine that our economic life was going to stagnate. And yet, by his example, looking at his example, we know that we can reset opportunity in America if we work hard.
Congressman, on the one hand, you have an African American man in the White House.
We do.
Yourself, an example. You know, your great-grandfather was a slave himself.
Yes.
But your father became a very successful doctor.
True.
You know, five of your brothers, actually, your 5 brothers, right?
Right.
According to this book, they're all very successful.
Yeah, they're
in their
doing
own
well.
fields. So, I mean, you see this huge improvement in individuals' lives on so many different levels.
True.
But of course, you're right. You also see this inner city poverty when you know,
Right.
you mentioned this the foreclosure crisis.
Sure.
Most of them who were hurt, they were actually, you know, minority people.
True.
So what is lacking? I mean, is the lack of will, or is the system? So where we need to work more to make sure that, you know, we make Dr. King proud?
Well, today I think we need to do basically 4 things. The first thing we've got to do is recommit ourselves to public investment. So not only all Americans know that our public infrastructure investment has been neglected. In Minnesota, we had a bridge fall into the Mississippi River. Well, all over this country, roads, bridges, transit, wastewater treatment, electrical grids need to be reinvested in, and that will require people to have jobs to do that, which will pay them good wages, and it'll improve American productivity, but also put money in people's pockets and food on their table. That's one thing. The other thing we need to do, we need to allow the right to organize on the job. We've seen union density decline in America dramatically, and because of that, the workers don't have any bargaining position with their employers, so wages have been flat. Now in the United States, if you look on a graph, gross domestic product per capita is at an all-time high. America's never been richer than it is right now. And yet we debate about whether or not we can take care of Head Start or early childhood education or our seniors or things like that. We've got to create more public investment and strengthen the right to organize. And then the next thing we need to do is have better trade policy. Now, trade is like gravity. Nations will trade with each other. There's nothing anybody can do to stop it, nor should they try. They should try to enhance it. But America should help raise labor standards, not lower them. So if we're going to do business with another country, we should say, well, we expect the workers will have rights on the job. People will have the right to organize. Nobody's going to get shot or killed because they're trying to organize a union. And we know in Colombia that happens.
But don't you see a clash here, a conflict? I mean, on the one hand, you're talking about paying more to our
Yes.
workers, you know, improving conditions. Of course, that's all necessary. And I think yesterday you were on the front page of Washington Post talking. You wrote a letter to Secretary Lopez about this, you know, pay raise.
Yeah.
At $10.10
Certainly.
per hour.
And also wage theft.
Yes, wage theft. That was a very good point. But at the same time, you're talking about trade relations, which is like you know, being in a global village.
Yes.
How do you compete with China, with India, with South Korea, with you know, other underdeveloped developing countries?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because you know, China has problems when you do trade with China. First of all, you have problems with intellectual property. They often will copy and knock off other countries' products, not just the United States, everybody. There's problems with regard to quality sometimes. They have worker problems, worker conditions. They have
Yeah,
issues.
but as long as they have a market here in this country,
Well, they have issues with pollution.
We will have a competition with them.
Right, but look, China's not going anywhere. It's a burgeoning nation and it's coming up. But what my point is, there's a lot of American companies that are saying, do we really want to resettle in a place where there's human rights are not good, labor rights are not good, pollution's not good, transportation costs are increasing, energy costs in America are going down. Maybe we should build it here. What I'm saying is there will be trade. There's no doubt. but why don't we elevate labor standards, not allow them to race to the bottom? So, for example, when the factory collapsed in Bangladesh, a lot of Americans are wearing clothes made there. Well, we value our relationship with Bangladesh, and I have one of my best friends in this world from Bangladesh.
What's his name?
His name is Asad Zaman.
Oh.
He's my Haji brother, and we're like that.
I think you mentioned his name in the book as well.
Probably
Asad.
so.
Yes,
He's one of my closest friends.
I was reading your account on Hajj, and
Well, he and I have been tight friends before that. But my point is, even this is not me criticizing Bangladesh. This is me listening to my friends from there who say the United States, the biggest economy in the world, should be a force to raise labor standards, not let them go down. And I believe that they're right, And so, and I don't mean to pick on China or Bangladesh or Colombia. The people there are wonderful human beings. I just think that when the United States does trade, we should say, we don't want to hear anything about laborers getting attacked for organizing. We don't want to hear anything about people living in awful, squalid conditions. And we believe that basic rights ought to be guaranteed. Now, of course, they're going to be different, but we should not be racing to the bottom. We should be trying to lift all boats.
Congressman, you're in your fourth term. And when people look at you, a lot of times, I personally, myself, I scratch my head. If we look at your constituency, your personality, your family, there are a lot of stuff which doesn't add up, so to speak.
Okay.
And let me tell you what. Your dad, your father, who's been mentioned here very fondly and very frequently, actually, he was a Republican.
Yes, he was.
He was a tough dad.
Very tough.
He raised you, with a stick. Not
Yes,
all the time, but
Hey, it came out from time to time.
You got some whipping, like quote unquote butt whipping.
Yes. Yep.
And then your constituency is just 1% Muslim.
Right.
You only have probably less than 10% African Americans.
That's right.
In
Right
your
around
district. And here you are, a successful member of Congress, very well known than most of them around the world. So, what's going on here? What you credit, who you credit for your success as this member? As quite a newer member actually of Congress.
Well, Fez, the reality is that there's a human universality. Can I tell you a quick story? Please. When I was the director of the Legal Rights Center, which was a law firm that represented people who didn't have enough money to hire a lawyer, a judge assigned a man to work with our office. This man was a white, wealthy man who was a managing partner in a major law firm, but he ended up taking the money of his partners, embezzling, and he got convicted. He went to jail for about a year, and the judge then said, now for your service, you will go volunteer for the Legal Rights Center. Now, he was this well-to-do, Ivy League trained, rich white man. Now he has to work with us. And he didn't have a law license anymore because they took it. So he couldn't take cases. So we figured, what are we going to do with this fellow? Well, we sent him to teach street law classes for poor minority kids in Minneapolis. Other people in my office said, oh my God, Keith, they'll eat him alive. He's had too much privilege. They've had too many hard times. Mm-hmm. But just knowing him, I said, he's going to do fine. He did great. You know why? Because there's something about the tough Shark Tank world of high finance and legal practice that is similar to growing up in the ghetto. And those kids and that man, they understood each other and they got along fine. And he volunteered teaching street law, which is just about how to deal with a lease for an apartment, how to buy a car, how to deal with a consumer problem. And he dealt with that. And then after his sentence was over, he kept doing it for 3-4 years. And it wasn't until he was an older guy, it wasn't until he started having health issues that he couldn't do it anymore. There was something, these people, him and these kids looked completely similar. They had saggy pants because, that they were poor street kids of color. He's a wealthy white man. They're supposed to have nothing in common, but they loved each other and had everything in common. So my point is, there's something about humanity, stripping away color, race, gender, religion, that we're all the same. And I believe that. I lived my life that way. And you know what? It works. You know, people want to earn a living. People want respect. People want to be listened to. People want a chance. People want to be told the truth. I don't care where you go. It's the same everywhere.
Well, at this point, Congressman, we have to take a very short break. And after we come back, we'll talk to you about another important topic mentioned very frequently in this book, your religion.
Yes, sir.
So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Each week here at Cafe DC, I go one-on-one. Politicians, literary giants, activists, power brokers, and many more from different walks of life. And focusing on what matters is my cup of, shall we say, coffee. Matters that make a difference in the society. Watch me, Faiz Rahman, on Cafe DC, every week only on PTV World.
Welcome back. Congressman, we said we're going to talk to you about your religion after we
Yes.
come back from the break. But I can't resist asking one more question before we go to that topic. After you became the member, because you're a Muslim, and it was basically a novelty back that time. 5 years after the attacks of 9/11,
Right.
and just after 5 years, a Muslim member of Congress. So you made news, but on top of it, because you took your oath on the Quran, and a copy which was actually owned by the third president of this country, Thomas Jefferson.
That's right.
So that made like international news waves, and I was one of those who actually covered your swearing in ceremony, and we also talked to you about that. But in those days, you were invited to lots of important, very well-known shows.
That's right.
People die to get on those shows here, and you declined.
That's
and I
right.
mean Jon Stewart, The Daily Show. He invited you, and you said no. Why?
Well, we wanted to prioritize local media. Of course, you were special, Fez, but you know,
Actually, we're international. So.
you're worldwide. But we wanted to prioritize that, and we also saw this as a serious subject, and we're a little reluctant to, do comedy. But I tell you the truth, I think in retrospect that might not have been a good decision, because so many people, particularly young people,
I'll send this clip to Jon Stewart.
Right. So many young people get their news from Jon Stewart and shows like that, and so I think it was there was a bit of lack of awareness at that time about how people get information, and we should have realized that, if you're a teenager or young or in your 20s, all on the college campuses, when Jon Stewart is on, all eyes on Stewart.
My son watches that all the time.
That's
every
right.
day.
We should have known.
So you did eventually. You did go there, right?
We went on the Daily Show to do, but we weren't. I wasn't interviewed by Jon Stewart though. We went on the Colbert Report.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's come back to the book again and your religion.
Yes.
Like I said before, it's quite historic and significant that in Congress, just after 5 years of the attacks of 9/11, we had a member elected, and then you're in your fourth term. There's a very emotional account. You're talking about hearing by Peter King, Congressman
right.
Peter King, the radicalization of Americans, where you actually wept. It
was a tough day.
You became very emotional, and you're saying that you were yourself, but you regret being that emotional that day. In the retrospect, you probably wouldn't have done that.
Well, you know what? I didn't really do it. It just happened. I didn't expect
Your
it
body
to.
just
It just happened. What really had happened is that I had been working hard to persuade my colleague Peter King not to do the hearings in the way that he did them. I said, look, there's a lot of Muslims that the Muslim community is not bragging about. You know, we're not proud of Osama bin Laden, you know. And so we're not going to say that you cannot have a hearing on some Muslims who engage in violent extremism. But don't only do something on Muslims. Do something on the Timothy McVeigh types, the Ku Klux Klan, these people who shoot people at women's
Across
health
the board.
clinics.
I mean,
Do
everybody should-
everybody. Do everybody. Because, you know, as you know, I mean, we have tragedies that happen across this country, and they're from multiple sources, and the person's motivation or ideology is not as important as the fact that they're using violence to impress their values on others. And so, so after that I wasn't able to do that, I said to Peter King, well, you know, then you know I'm just not going to be able to support this, and you know. have
But you
to
did
quit.
appear on the hearing, and it
Well,
was,
he
it was
and
a very
he said-
forceful testimony.
He then invited me to be at the hearing. He said, I'll let you, my concession to you is that you can testify, which was not an easy decision for me, because I thought, well, if I testify, am I in some way validating these hearings? But then I thought, you know, be part of the conversation. I commonly say, you got to be in dialogue.
And that's how the system works here. I
Right.
mean, yes, you be on the table,
Right.
so to speak.
If you're not at the table,
Yeah.
you're on the menu,
Exactly. Absolutely.
and you don't want to be on
Good
the
line.
menu.
Good line.
So anyway, bottom line is we went and we testified. And I wrote a very academic, very professional statement out. But then at the end, I started talking about this 23-year-old kid named Mohammed Salman Hamdani. And this young man was an All-American kid. He was born in Pakistan, but he was an All-American kid. He played football, not with the round ball, but with the oblong American football. He wore number 79.
Not the soccer, football.
He played, American football. He had on his license plate on his car, he had Young Jedi because he liked Star Wars. And he was a first responder. And this kid, when the glass was falling and the smoke was pouring out and people were dying, this kid ran to the tragedy site as others were running away. And he ran into that site to save people's lives. And in so doing, he lost his own. This boy is a hero. And he's a Muslim too. And so, you know, as Peter King is having a hearing about Muslims and violent extremism, what about Muslims who gave their lives to save other Americans? What about what about Muslim first responders? What about Muslim victims of the crime? I mean, and I think I got overcome, right? My tongue got thick. I could feel warm tears rolling down my cheeks.
Quite a scene on TV,
And
live TV.
I couldn't stop it. I wanted to stop it, but I couldn't stop it. And I don't know, you know, I've had a lot of friends snatched off airplanes for no other reason than their beard's too big or they were praying, or I've had people, go through a lot of changes. One young woman had her hijab snatched off her head, called nasty names, and just a lot of Muslims who've had to go through a lot of indignity that they didn't deserve. And they love this country, and they want to serve this country. They want to make it better, and yet some Americans don't realize that we're all in this thing together. So something about that moment made me have an emotional reaction. What started out as a very professional, dignified presentation ended up being an emotional presentation about the heroic, faithful acts of a young man who gave everything to save his fellow Americans, and I think that need to be recognized.
Congressman, you've been to Saudi Arabia
Yeah.
many times.
Yep.
And of course, once for the Hajj.
Once for the Hajj, once for Umrah, twice for Umrah.
From a beautiful account, the Hajj account. In your
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is a beautiful
you're,
account.
You're quoting, Malcolm X.
Sure.
When he went to Hajj. The whole, his beautiful quote.
Sure.
About the diversity of the Muslim world.
Yeah.
You know, how people, with the bluest of the bluest eyes.
Yeah.
I think Malcolm X.
Yeah.
And
Blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes.
I mean, people
black
from
skin, brown skin, white skin, everybody.
Everybody from every corner of the world.
Yeah.
People gather.
People from China,
China.
people from Latin America,
Right.
all unified
for one purpose.
For one
yeah.
purpose.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite a show. But on the other hand, Saudi Arabia is not a great example of human rights,
True.
women issues.
Right.
As a member of Congress, have you been able to raise some of those issues when you go to that country?
Yes, I have. As a matter of fact, when I met King Abdullah ibn Abdulaziz, whose title is the custodian of the two holy sites,
Right.
I said to him that we were very proud that for the first time in American history, we have a woman speaker, Nancy Pelosi. And that because we have laws that say that everyone can rise to the full measure of their talent, we're able to have a very talented individual like Nancy Pelosi be our speaker, who's probably been one of the most successful speakers in American history. And yet in Saudi Arabia, women can't drive. There's no women in the majlis. And I asked him how they're coming along with women's rights, given that Khadija, the first convert,
Yes, yeah.
given the Khadija, Prophet Muhammad,
I
peace
mean,
and
there's
blessings.
a beautiful account of when he got the first wahi, the first revelation.
Right.
How he went to Khadija and then Warqa bin Nawfal, who was a Christian
That's right.
scholar. So,
Yeah. So the king said to me, "We're working on it. I hope we can get women's rights in place before your country did, because your country's older than our country. So we,
so there's some hope.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
some hope.
But he said he appointed a women's rights commission. He said he has appointed some women in an advisory capacity, and he pointed out that there are more women graduating from college than men in Saudi Arabia. I believe that he wants to make progress in this front. I believe that it's a very conservative country, and I also believe that the time to do what's right is always now. So I hope for the best for them.
Well, Congressman, it's a beautiful book. A lot of good stuff for us to learn and enjoy as well. The language is just plain and simple. How can our overseas audience get hold of your book? I think it's Amazon.com.
Yeah, it's on Amazon.com. They could order it either electronically or in a hard copy. Actually, I was talking to somebody about translating it into Arabic and Urdu.
Very good.
And so we're hoping that we can get that done, inshallah.
Maybe I can volunteer for Urdu.
Well,
Absolutely.
let's see.
Good. So, Congressman, we're out of time.
Fez, wonderful.
Thank you very much for coming back to the show. It's always a pleasure having you on the show, as well as talking to you in person.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Count on me.
Absolutely. Next time. Yeah. Anything. If you have another book coming out, please let us know. We'll be happy to talk about it.
We will, inshallah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, so that was our conversation with the member of Congress, Congressman Keith Ellison, about his new book, My Country, 'Tis of Thee. Thank you very much for watching Cafe DC. See you next time.